Welcome, my name is Anne Toomey and welcome to this YouTube video about the difference between Cabinet and the Executive Council. So what is the difference? What do they actually do? And do we really need both of them? And that's what I'm going to explain today. The Cabinet and the Executive Council are both comprised of ministers. So do we really need both of them, or is this just some kind of duplication? Yes, we actually do need them both. They fulfil different purposes and both of them have an important role. The Cabinet is a body that makes policy decisions, meaning it decides what the government should do, what it spends money on, and what government programs it runs, and indeed what laws it's going to ask Parliament to make. It's comprised of senior ministers at the Commonwealth level. In contrast, at the state level, where the number of ministers is smaller, it's usually comprised of all ministers. There's a practical limit on the number of ministers that you can actually have in a cabinet, which is based on how many people can you fit around a table and actually make sure that they're all heard and that they can make a collective decision. Now, Cabinet has no legal powers. It's not recognised by the Constitution at the Commonwealth level. It's in fact based on history and convention. The term cabinet comes from the name of the room in the United Kingdom in which the King's advisors used to meet. Now they found that it was useful if they actually met before seeing the King so that they could agree on one single position to put to him on any question. Otherwise, if they disagreed, the King could just pick and choose from among the different views and get his own way on everything. Now, the King eventually stopped attending cabinet meetings. Some people say that this was because King George I was German, didn't really speak very good English and therefore didn't want to come. Other people say, well, actually it wasn't his English that was so much the problem, he was just not very bright and not terribly interested in English governmental affairs. Either way, the King stopped attending the cabinet meetings, and so the cabinet meetings traditionally went on without him. If the King was then needed to give legal effect to a decision, he could be formally advised on what to sign at a short meeting of what is called in the United Kingdom the Privy Council. When the Commonwealth Constitution was being written, the drafters took this British approach. They didn't mention cabinet in the Constitution, but it was always the understanding amongst them that it would be in cabinet where all the serious decisions are made. Ministers would be collectively responsible for those decisions to the Parliament and to the people. They were obliged to defend those decisions publicly and not reveal who said what in a cabinet meeting, and this is known as cabinet confidentiality and is important to ensure that government decisions are not undermined. Cabinet decides things like how to deal with big issues like climate change or Australia's defence and foreign policy. It approves important appointments such as High Court judges. It decides on what laws it will ask Parliament to pass and how to spend public money. It decides on what services should be provided to the public and how they are run. But Cabinet, having no legal status and no legal powers, cannot implement any of its own decisions. If it wants a law made, it has to get ministers to ask Parliament to pass it. If it wants less important kinds of rules made, like regulations or proclamations, it has to go to the Governor-General to do that. Other cabinet decisions are implemented by particular ministers who are given powers under statutes to act in a particular way. The Public Service also gives effect to cabinet decisions. The Executive Council is the body that formally advises the Governor-General or the Governor of a state to give effect to those cabinet decisions that require the Governor or the Governor-General's approval. The Constitution says, in section 62, that there shall be a Federal Executive Council to advise the Governor-General in the government of the Commonwealth. And section 64 says that its members shall be ministers. The Executive Council is comprised of all the ministers. Now, curiously, at the Commonwealth level, it's technically comprised of all former ministers as well, But of course, once a minister is no longer in office, they're not ever called to attend any meetings. Only current ministers attend Executive Council meetings to advise the Governor-General. In practice, only 2 ministers are rostered on to attend each meeting with the Governor-General. The Governor-General is then presented with a pile of documents, which are called minutes, which set out a recommendation and often have attached to them some kind of an explanation about what it's for. The ministers then formally advise the Governor-General to agree to those minutes. Normally then the Governor-General does so by signing the minutes and handing them back to the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet to implement. So why go through that formality? Isn't it a waste of time? No, it's actually valuable for 3 reasons. First, it provides a lot of extra eyes to check on things to make sure that they're being done properly and they comply with the law. It's a way of picking up mistakes. Now, many years ago, I ran the legal branch of the New South Wales Cabinet Office, and the Governor's official secretary would go through all of the Executive Council minutes that arrived in advance of each meeting, and if something looked wrong, he'd ring me up. Now, 9 times out of 10, he'd be right, and there was an error, and I'd make sure that it was fixed. Now, usually this was because a particular department did not commonly do a certain type of procedure, like compulsorily acquiring land, but it needed to do it on a one-off occasion. So the poor public servant told to do it, never done it before, and then searched out an old precedent and copied it. But the law had since changed, so that they're actually applying the wrong law and doing it in the wrong way. So all of this is not a conspiracy, it's just a stuff-up, and it does tend to happen quite often. So this type of error normally gets picked up in the Executive Council process, either by the public servants in the Premier's or the Prime Minister's department who oversee the process and who again would see many of the same type of documents and therefore recognise that it was wrong, or by the Office of the Governor or the Governor-General, who again spot errors for the same reason. So the formality of the processing of these decisions through the Executive Council is important to ensure that they are legally correct. The second reason it is valuable is as a way of preventing corruption. If a minister alone advises the Governor-General on a particular subject and no one else is involved, the minister may think that he or she can mislead or deceive the Governor-General about what is actually going on and be confident that their communications will be confidential. But if the advice has to go through a lot of public servants in the Prime Minister's department and then through the Office of the Governor-General before the meeting is held, as well as then being seen by 2 ministers attending the meeting, then it's much more likely that alarm bells will be rung. And this is especially true if there is a pattern of corrupt conduct. So an example here is a former prison minister in New South Wales who was later found to have corruptly advised the Governor to order the early release of prisoners. Now, this was able to be done because he was giving direct advice to the Governor without going through an Executive Council process so that other people weren't seeing it. And as a consequence of that example, the system was changed in New South Wales to ensure that any such advice in the future went through the Executive Council so that it could be seen by many eyes and that corruption would be less likely to occur, and if it did occur, it would be caught. The third reason why the Executive Council is useful is that it gives the Governor-General or the Governor an opportunity to raise concerns with ministers. And this is a chance for the Governor-General or the Governor to raise queries, express concerns, seek further advice, etc. If this is raised directly with ministers face to face, they are more likely to take the concerns seriously and look into them. And again, this can result in improvements in government. So while the real political power is held by the Cabinet and the Executive Council is a mere formality, it's still important and a useful institution to ensure lawfulness and integrity in the government process. I hope you have found this useful, and please subscribe for more explanations about how the constitutional system of government works.